That noon, the sun was hanging straight overhead, like something out of a cheap cowboy movie, while I was standing in front of my family's old cattle barn, one that had been there since my great great grandfather's time. And then, Karen showed up. Not just any Karen, the HOA Karen. The kind of character who could turn a single bougainvillea in your yard into a community wide aesthetic threat. She marched out, hands trembling but oozing with confidence, waving a stack of glossy pink printer paper like it was holy scripture, and shouted as if the whole universe needed to hear. You've got 24 hours to remove this pile of junk wood from HOA property. The neighbors watching were whispering like an audience at a free outdoor play. A couple of kids even thought they'd stumbled into live theater. I didn't move an inch. Karen thought she'd just landed a knockout punch. But nope. Slowly, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a carefully rolled document. The paper unfurled in the wind, gleaming with a bold red seal. Federal Landmark Certificate. Not a photocopy, not a Word doc printout, but the real thing. Signature, embossed seal, and government backing. I locked eyes with Karen, my voice steady, each word dropping onto the scorching concrete like a hammer. Dorothy, you just threatened federal property. In that instant, Karen froze. The pink papers quivered in her hand, as if she'd just seen the ghost of George Washington appear in the cattle barn. The crowd went dead silent. That was the table turner. And it was only the beginning of a chain of events so wild that if I told you the rest, you'd swear I made it up. But I swear, every single detail is on camera. To help you understand just how insane this whole thing got, I've got to start from the beginning. My name's Tom Henderson, fifth generation born and raised on the land known as Henderson Ranch. 22 acres, a cattle barn built back in 1872, a squeaky old windmill that still spins just fine, and a noisy herd of goats that count as family. For me, that simple life was enough. Feed the goats in the morning, check the barn in the afternoon, sip coffee on the porch at night. Peaceful, tidy, and bothering absolutely no one. Then came Pine Ridge Estates. If you've never heard of it, picture a place where every single house looks exactly the same. So much so that you could get lost in front of your own front door. Beige walls, ruler straight white fences, and a community of folks convinced they're living in some upscale eco-paradise. To be blunt, it's copy-paste suburbia, just with the smug satisfaction of calling it green living. And of course, the moment Pine Ridge showed up, my 150-year-old cattle barn suddenly became a visual threat. They called it a visual footprint. Sounds fancy, but really it just means they hated looking out their windows and seeing something that wasn't on their HOA-approved color palette. Leading that charge was Dorothy Fitzgerald, though I just call her Karen because, honestly, no other name fits better. She's the HOA president, self-anointed guardian of aesthetic harmony. Before that, she was a retired substitute drama teacher, and I swear in her head the whole world is still a stage, and the rest of us are just background actors in the HOA tragedy she's directing. From the very day Pine Ridge touched the boundary of my land, Dorothy looked at that cattle barn like it was a criminal. To her, I wasn't a landowner anymore, just a resident failing to comply with modern standards. It all started with little complaints, but I never imagined it would escalate into a full-blown war. Now let me spell it out for you about Karen, the one who turned the HOA, which should have stuck to trimming common lawns and fixing streetlights, into something with ambitions closer to a backyard United Nations. Dorothy Fitzgerald, blonde curls straight out of a bottle, eyes forever wide as if she'd just uncovered an architectural crime, and a shrill voice strong enough to wake every rooster in the county at 5 a.m. Karen wasn't just the HOA president. She had anointed herself the guardian of modern harmony. Sounds prestigious, but what it really meant was this. If something in her line of sight didn't match the shade of her khaki pants, it had to go. I swear, once I saw her standing in the middle of her front lawn, dressed head to toe in beige, raising her arms like some off-brand Greek goddess, declaring that neutral earth tones are the foundation of civilized society. Meanwhile, right behind her, my weathered dark wood cattle barn loomed like it was mocking her entire speech. Karen had one lethal weapon, her home inkjet printer. Anytime something offended her delicate sense of color coordination, she'd crank out a notice, slap on a DIY HOA seal, and call it official. One day, it might be a warning that my barn door didn't fall within the approved color spectrum. The next, it was a citation because my windmill spun more than 15 rotations per minute, supposedly causing noise pollution. I'm not kidding. Once she even knocked on my door to complain that my goats were bleeding outside of approved hours. But what both cracked me up and made my skin crawl was the way Karen carried herself, like she wielded more power than the county sheriff. In her eyes, the HOA wasn't just about lawns and recycling bins. The HOA was the government. The HOA was the court. And of course, the HOA was her personal kingdom. At the time, I didn't fully realize it, but soon it became clear. Karen wasn't just an annoying neighbor. She was a storm waiting to wipe out my family's heritage, just because it didn't fit the holy beige she worshipped. And that was only the beginning of the madness to come. If you think Karen stopped at a few wrinkled printer paper notices, congratulations. You've underestimated the twisted imagination of a true HOA Karen. She didn't just want to hassle me with paperwork. She was determined to turn my life into a never-ending reality show. One morning, I woke up to find the front wall of my cattle barn spray painted in bright red graffiti. Pending demolition by HOA. Letters as big as the barn doors, like the FBI had just slapped a seizure notice on the place. I hadn't even had the chance to scrub it off before Karen was circling the barn, snapping photos like a paparazzi, muttering, "This is going straight into the next slideshow." But she wasn't done. She set up a neon plastic fence right across the ranch entrance, hanging a sign that screamed, "Hazardous area, keep out." Neighbors looked on, whispering, "Oh my God, is there radiation over there?" When in truth, the only hazardous thing in sight was Karen and the brand new bullhorn she'd just bought. The peak of insanity came the day Karen decided to liberate my goats. Yes, she literally opened the pen, shooed the herd into chaos, and shouted, "This livestock was never HOA approved. It's being impounded." Picture a stampede of terrified goats, some slamming into fences hard enough to bleed. I was furious, but I held back because I knew every second was being caught on camera. And as if that weren't enough, one afternoon, Karen dragged the entire HOA board to my front gate, projector in tow, for an emergency HOA meeting. On the screen, she displayed photos of my cattle barn, except she'd photoshopped them to look like a haunted house collapsing in on itself. Through the bullhorn, she screamed, "If the authorities won't act, then we will tear it down ourselves. This is our community's aesthetic duty." I stood behind the fence, arms crossed, torn between rage and laughter. The whole neighborhood sat there like they were at some TED Talk about barn extermination. But what Karen didn't realize was that every single one of her wild theatrics had already become pure gold evidence, evidence that would lead her straight into the jaws of her own downfall. And then, the fateful day. It happened on a blazing afternoon, the kind where the sun feels like it's cranking up the stage lights for the final act of Karen's play. I had just finished feeding the goats when I heard a clack at the fence. Looking up, I saw Karen. But not the usual Karen armed with a wrinkled citation or a boring speech. No. This time, Dorothy Fitzgerald, HOA Karen, was climbing over my fence, clutching in one hand a stack of neon pink papers and, you won't believe this, a shiny pistol with a pearl handle, looking like it came straight out of the prop closet from some cheap cowboy movie. She landed with a thud, high heels stabbing into the grass, and screamed in my face, "You refuse to listen! This is an official order granting me the right to use any means necessary to protect community aesthetics. This barn will be demolished immediately." I glanced at the trembling pink sheet in her hand, printed in Comic Sans, stamped with a lopsided red marker circle, and blaring the words, "Special Enforcement Order, HOA Authority." Honestly, the only thing that paper was fit for was wrapping a sandwich, but Karen believed in it like it was a CIA clearance badge. Left hand waving the order, right hand pointing that pistol squarely at my 150-year-old cattle barn. The goats beside me stared wide-eyed, probably thinking, "Holy crap, she's really lost it." I didn't yell. I didn't run. I didn't flinch. I simply stepped up onto the porch, reached into my pocket, and unrolled the document I'd been keeping ready for 2 long years. I let the sunlight catch the bold red seal of the United States government, a National Historic Landmark Certificate. I locked eyes with Karen, calm enough to hear the wind rattling through the blades of the old windmill behind me, and said, Dorothy, you just officially pointed a gun at federal property. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. Karen's face drained of color, the pistol sinking slowly like a scene in slow motion. The mouth that had never stopped yapping fell open, silent for the first time in living memory. And I knew, in that instant, the board had completely flipped. Karen thought the showdown at the fence would end with a few screams and threats. But it didn't. Because while she was waving that pearl-handled pistol around like an extra from Wild West, the whole spectacle had been captured in crystal clear HD by my security cameras. Every frame of the shiny gun, every wobbling pink paper. And I, the mild-mannered farmer, sent the entire package straight to the feds, along with a case file thick enough to rival a Stephen King novel. 2 days later, Pine Ridge Estates witnessed something it had never seen before. 2 sleek black SUVs with tinted windows rolling silently into the neighborhood. Federal agents stepped out in suits and mirrored sunglasses, the afternoon sun bouncing off their lenses. They didn't need directions. They marched straight to house num. 14, the very spot where Karen churned out her Comic Sans urgent HOA notices. The neighbors gathered like it was a county fair. One woman gasped, "My God, the FBI started with the HOA?" Another man whispered, "I knew it. I kept saying she was crazy. This day was bound to come." Karen, of course, wasn't about to go down quietly. She strutted onto her porch, khakis perfectly matched to the curtains, clutching her trademark stack of pink papers. She bellowed, "This is a misunderstanding. I acted for the future of this community. I have absolute authority over the HOA's visual footprint." The agents just exchanged looks. One flipped open a fat dossier, tapped the cover, and said, "Mrs. Fitzgerald, we've got everything. Video, audio, witnesses, and yes, even your slideshow." Karen's face drained white. Inside that file was footage of her screaming into a bullhorn, "If the authorities won't act, we'll tear it down ourselves." They even uncovered records showing she'd used HOA funds to pay a private lawyer to research how to evict me from my own ancestral land. The fallout? Pure chaos. The HOA board scattered like cockroaches under a kitchen light. One member swore they had no idea about any of this. The treasurer declared a sudden case of emotional exhaustion. The secretary resigned on the spot. In short, once the spotlight hit, the whole circus collapsed. And Karen? She was led away in tears, still screaming, "This is a conspiracy. That barn is unconstitutional. I'll be back." But this time, nobody believed her. The residents of Pine Ridge just watched in silence, some even sighing in relief, as if the neighborhood had finally been exorcised. And me? From my porch, I simply sipped my coffee and thought, Karen had tested the government, and the government doesn't play HOA. Karen's trial quickly became the hottest ticket in town, drawing a bigger crowd than the high school football game. The residents of Pine Ridge showed up in matching beige outfits, calling it aesthetic solidarity, and packed the courtroom to watch the spectacular downfall of HOA Karen. When Karen walked in, the swagger was gone, but the theatrics weren't. She clutched an oversized stack of pink papers, mascara smeared like she'd just finished filming a soap opera, and opened with a choked sob. "Your Honor, I only acted for the safety and aesthetic interests of the community. I'm the victim here, a fragile woman forced to stand against this aggressive rural lifestyle." The courtroom held its breath. Then the prosecution flipped on the screen. Up came the HD video. Karen climbing the fence, brandishing her pearl-handled pistol, screaming, "This barn will be demolished immediately." The chaotic bleating of goats filled the speakers. For a moment, silence. Then a snicker from the back row. And just like that, the whole room erupted in laughter. The prosecutors barely had to work. They had the video. They had the fake citations printed in Comic Sans. They had receipts showing Karen used HOA funds to pay for her personal lawyer. They even pulled up her own Facebook post bragging, "Tomorrow I'll finally tear down that disgusting barn. Pine Ridge will be spotless again." The judge looked at Karen, voice dry as desert sand. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, no one, not even an HOA, stands above federal law." The verdict came down hard: 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, $150,000 in fines and restitution, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board. Oh, and a restraining order. She was forbidden from coming within 500 feet of my ranch. Karen rose, pale and disoriented. Suddenly she pointed straight at me, tears streaking black trails down her cheeks. "You ruined my life. Historic barns are unconstitutional. I'll be back. A court officer stepped forward, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Karen collapsed back into her chair, sobbing, mascara running down in twin lines like train tracks leading straight to federal prison. Around me, neighbors whispered, "Finally, peace at last." I just crossed my arms and smiled, because in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. Karen may have won her HOA meetings, but in federal court, she never stood a chance. After the trial, Pine Ridge Estates fell into a strange kind of quiet. No more Comic Sans citations stuffed into my mailbox. No more bullhorn lectures about aesthetic harmony. Instead, there was only the sound of wind whispering through the old windmill, the sharp bleats of goats, and the cattle barn still standing tall, just as it had for a century and a half. The neighbors started doing something they'd never dared before, smiling at me when they walked past. A few even leaned over the fence to mutter that the barn actually looks kind of vintage, as if they just stumbled on the latest Pinterest trend. I just nodded, saying nothing, because honestly, the only thing I found amusing was knowing Karen, the woman who once believed she outranked the government, was now folding laundry in a federal prison. I learned something from all this. When an HOA Karen convinces herself she is the law, the way to beat her isn't shouting, and it isn't rage. It's patience, and a fat case file sent to the right office. The government may move slow, but once it moves, every Karen goes silent. That night, I sat on my porch with a hot cup of coffee, watching the sunset paint the old barn in crimson light. The goats grazed peacefully, blissfully unaware they just survived an aesthetic purge. I sighed, then laughed. In the end, I thought, Karen finally learned one simple truth. You can Karen your neighbors, but you can't Karen the federal government. And that, my friends, was the end.